Sorry, that was premature. Good morning, everyone. My name is Councillor Rick Jones, and I'd like to welcome you all to this morning's licensing subcommittee hearing. I will explain how the meeting will be conducted in a moment, but before that, I could please ask the clerk to provide us with some awesome guidance on how to participate in the meeting.
Good morning. Can all participants hear me? If you're joining remotely, please raise your virtual Zoom hand if you are able to do so. I will start with some reminders to members and other attendees about the way we conduct council meetings in the new hybrid format. This meeting is being held both over Zoom and with officers and councillors present in the council chamber adopting COVID safety measures. I can confirm that those present in the chamber are sitting socially distanced and are thus permitted to remove their face masks while seated. We need to remind all persons attending the meeting in person that they must sign in on the meeting register and the NHS app by the NHS Test and Trace QR code. Wear a face covering when in the building unless you are seated in the meeting or have a face covering exemption. Observe 2 metre social distancing where possible. Clean your desk and any supplied equipment, such as the microphone, before and after the meeting using the cleaning materials supplied. Avoid physical contact such as handshakes. Avoid sharing pens, documents and other objects. Use hand sanitizer when entering and before leaving the meeting rooms and buildings and after touching any surfaces such as door handles. Abide by any signage or seating plans to help maintain social distancing. Parties to the proceedings have been encouraged to attend remotely via Zoom. However, they can choose to attend in person or remotely from within the Market Street building, for example, from reception or the Roger Croft room, or from any public device in any location. The meeting is fully accessible both physically and remotely for any member of the public. This meeting is being webcast and recorded. For those attending remotely via Zoom, the chairman will be checking at various points during the meeting that you have been able to hear all of the proceedings. We would ask that you confirm this by clicking the raise hand link at the bottom of your screen. We cannot proceed with the meeting until we assure participants attending remotely can be heard when permitted to speak and can hear. If at any point you are not able to hear, please could I ask you to let us know if you are able to, for example, using the chat function or raising your Zoom hand. If we become aware that any of the parties attending remotely have not been able to hear, we will have to go back to that point in the meeting when they were able to, or it may be necessary to adjourn the meeting. If you are unable to hear the proceedings, it might be useful to join the meeting via telephone rather than the microphone on your device. Please notify us if you have been absent for any part of the meeting while phoning in. Those of you attending are currently muted. If you are attending remotely, please remember to unmute yourself when you're asked to speak by the chairman and then remute when you have finished speaking. The host may remute you if you forget to do so. You will be advised to unmute yourself if you start to speak and have forgotten to do so. We ask that microphones are muted when not speaking to minimize disruption from background noise and also to prevent any issues arising from feedback. Those of you present in the council chamber can speak using microphones. The chairman will set out the order in which people will be asked to speak. If at the appropriate point, anyone attending remotely wishes to ask a question, please use the raise hand facility. This will give an indication against your name on the participant list. The chairman will then be notified that you wish to ask a question. The chairman will then invite you to ask your questions in the order he deems most appropriate. Once you are speaking, please lower your Zoom hand. The host may cancel your Zoom hand if you forget to do so. If you are present in the council chamber and wish to ask a question, please raise your physical hand. Anyone that has phoned in, you won't be able to signal. So once other participants who have raised a Zoom hand have asked their questions, I will ask the chairman to invite anyone who has telephoned in to ask their questions in the order that he wishes to do so. If we need to adjourn the meeting at any point, the chairman will adjourn all parties, and all parties will be advised of the revised time and date of the meeting. If it is a short adjournment, you'll be able to rejoin this Zoom meeting. Otherwise, a fresh appointment will be sent out. Does anyone have any questions about the way the meeting will be conducted?
Thank you, Gillian, for that explanation. Can I check, and I will be doing this at regular points during the hearing, that everyone can hear me? And if for the remote people, can you raise your hand? Thank you very much. I'd like to confirm that this application we'll be hearing today is from Andrew Wiper for a review of an existing premises license in relation to the Newbury Real Ale Festival, which is held on land between Northcroft Leisure Centre and Newbury Cricket Club, Northcroft Lane, RG14 1RS. This application has been recorded under reference number 21/00812/LQN. I'm supported this morning in this morning's subcommittee by councillors Graham Pask and Tony Linden. The solicitor advising this subcommittee is Beth Varco on my right, and Julian Steele on my left. I will maintain a record of the proceedings. We're also being assisted by Gordon Oliver, who will act as our Zoom host for the meeting. I understand that Mr. Andrew Wiper, the applicant, is in attendance today in person. Can I just check that Wiper is the right pronunciation? Great, thank you. Councillor Martha Vickers from West Berkshire Council is in attendance today. Can I check, please, Martha, whether you're representing Newbury Town Council or representing yourself as a ward member in this meeting?
Doesn't seem to want to unmute, sorry. Thank you, Chair. I'm representing both, actually. I'm here as the West Berkshire Council ward member, but I've also been asked by Newbury Town Council to represent them and their views. Is that okay?
Okay, I will ask you to make that representation when I invite you to speak as ward member then.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Mr. Russell Davidson, representing Environmental Health, is in attendance via Zoom. Ms. Sarah Dutfield, the licence holder who has objected to the review, is in attendance in person in the chamber. And in addition, supporting the licence holder, her representatives John Payne and Edward Hemstridge are here in the chamber as well. I imagine you're here for the supporters of the festival, and you are? Great, thank you very much. And I see that Tim Pollack is on Zoom also supporting the festival.
That's correct, Chair.
The council's licensing officer, Brad Tim, is attending in person and will introduce the application when we get to that point. As I said, I'll be asking those attending remotely if they can hear at various points in the proceedings to make sure that we are proceeding according to legislation. So next on the agenda, can I ask members of the panel, do they have any interests that they wish to declare? Councillor Pask.
Chairman, thank you. Just in the interest of forgive the schoolboy error. No, still on. Right, forgive the schoolboy error, Chairman. I'm now unmuted. Just in the interest of clarity.
No, you need to be muted. Sorry. You speak through the microphone, not.
Yes, I'm trying.
Mute yourself.
Right, is that better?
That's better.
I apologise. Just in the interest of clarity, I recall the time when Miss Dutfield was a planning officer in this authority. I knew her in that capacity, but I haven't met her very much since.
Councillor Linden.
Yes, I also knew Miss Duckfield as a planning officer in the same condition as Councillor Pask. And also to state that one of our councillors, Councillor Joe Stewart, works for Daisy's Dreams, just joined them. So I don't think that will make any difference to this application, but just to let people know that that is the case. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. That's noted. Okay, I'll now go on to explain how these meetings are conducted. Each individual or group of individuals or a representative of a group will have a maximum of 10 minutes to speak and make their presentation. And that is between them if there is more than one person to speak on behalf of that group. After each contribution, there can be questions from the subcommittee members and then from each group in turn at my invitation. Questions may be asked through me as chairman and must be relevant to the application or the council's licensing policy, or for the purposes of clarifying a statement that has been made. To facilitate that, please raise your Zoom hand, or if in the chamber, your physical hand, if you have a question you wish to put, and wait for me, please, to call upon you. The order of contributions will be as follows. First of all, I'll invite the licensing officer, Brad Tim, to introduce the application. Next, the applicant, Mr. Andrew Wiper, to make his presentation. Next, the licence holder, Ms. Sarah Dutfield, is to speak. Then supporters of the event will have an opportunity to speak, and supporters of the review will have their chance. Oh, okay. Then I'll invite Mr. Russell Davidson from Environmental Health to speak as the responsible authority. And last, the ward member, Arthur Vickers, will have a chance to speak, and in fact will cover the supporters of the review at the same time. The applicant will then have a right to address comments made at the subcommittee. I am proposing to suspend a procedure rule in accordance with Rule 7.7.1 of the Constitution, and propose also that the licence holder is given an opportunity to address comments made. I shall do this after the applicant has spoken, if he wishes to do so. I've been notified that the council has received overnight more. Oh, sorry. I'm being reminded about procedure. Members, I propose that we change the rule or suspend the rule 7.7.1 to allow the licence holder to speak at the end as well. Does that receive a seconder? Second. Are we all happy with that? Good. Thank you. Thank you for that reminder. I'll need plenty of those through this hearing, I think. Yes, I've been notified that the council has received overnight some more material from the licence holder's solicitor. Proposed additional conditions and an element of case law. Can I invite the licence holder to make an application to include that in the papers?
Chair, I'm grateful. In fact, that it's not really additional information that's being provided. All that I've provided is a written version of the conditions that we will propose verbally in our presentation to you. I'm happy to have this considered as additional material if that is your wish, but at the end of the day we will make these suggestions on conditions as part of our submission. The document was only provided really for your convenience so that you don't need to note down during the course of the hearing what I'm going to say.
Okay. As the material was provided to us overnight and not 5 days hence, I think it would be helpful to have it included in the material and distributed accordingly, but only if everyone on the call and each group represented agrees to that to happen. So can I ask if anyone objects to that material being included in the presentation material? Thank you. in which case I'll ask that to be distributed. Okay. Can I remind you again that, yes, if that would be helpful. It'd be useful for all of us to have it, as you say, we won't have to take notes then. Right, while that's being distributed, just remind people that each individual group has 10 minutes to speak and to make their case. And this should take into account the Licensing Act's 4 objectives, which are the prevention of crime and disorder, public safety, the prevention of public nuisance, and the protection of children from harm. Gillian Steele will be timing the 10 minutes and will notify you when we have 1 minute left. Once all representations have been made and all questions asked, I will close the meeting. And after this, the members of the panel will meet privately to make a decision, and a written decision notice will be issued to interested parties, setting out the verdict as soon as possible, but in any event, within 5 working days of this hearing. I'd like to take the opportunity to remind all parties present that this is a public meeting and the meeting will be webcast on YouTube. It is therefore necessary to remind parties that they are in a public forum and to ask participants to bear this in mind in terms of anything said during the meeting. Yeah, okay. I thought you were doing that anyway. Yeah, thanks. Just distribute the. Can you distribute the? Okay.
Yes, I can confirm that I'm distributing that.
Okay, thank you. Can I just check again that everyone has heard the proceedings so far and continues to hear them satisfactorily? Thank you. Right, could I start then by inviting Brad Tim, please, to make his presentation and to introduce himself.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, all. Good morning, Chair. My name is Brad Tim. I'm a licensing officer with the Public Protection Partnership for West Berkshire Council. So West Berkshire Council received an application, on the 20th of September 2021 for the review of a premises licence under Section 51 of the Licensing Act 2003 for the premises at Newbury Real Ale Festival. That's the land between Northcroft Leisure Centre and Newbury Cricket Club, Northcroft Lane, Newbury, West Berks, postcode RG141RS. As the Chair's already alluded to, the grounds for the review are all of the 4 licensing objectives. I'll reiterate those: the prevention of crime and disorder, public safety, the prevention of public nuisance, and the protection of children. So the 28-day consultation period ran from the 24th of September 2021 to the 22nd of October 2021. The responsible authorities, ward members, and the parish council were advised by email on that same date, the 24th of September. The obligatory blue notice was displayed by West Berkshire Public Protection licensing officers at the premises, the council offices in Market Street, Newbury, and on the Public Protection Partnership website. So during the statutory consultation period, the licensing authority received 1 representation from one of the responsible authorities, that was Environmental Health. However, no other responses were received from the responsible authorities. However, further to that, the council did receive 232 responses to the consultation from persons and organisations who are not responsible authorities. Thank you, Chair.
Do we have any questions for our licensing officer? No? Can I ask if anyone else on the meeting has a question for our licensing officer? No? Okay, I'll move on. Could I now invite Mr. Andrew Wiper to introduce himself and make his presentation, please?
Okay, thank you. Good morning. So my name is Andrew Wiper. I live close to the, very close actually to the premises concerned. May I start now? I'd like to start by saying that I appreciate this festival has now run for a number of years in Newbury and that it is a popular event with many people. I'd also point out that I personally have better things to do than spending my time sitting here in a review like this. So the application has certainly not been taken lightly. But I think it's important now that somebody takes a stand. Now, I draw your attention in the first instance to the fact that I'm not the only person to feel that there are issues which need resolution. There have been other submissions from people who also support for various of the reasons that I have outlined in the application. I would stress I'm not suggesting there should not be a real ale festival, but I believe, having read other submissions, that I also speak for others when I say that I think organisers should now really make a decision as to what they actually want. So if they want to hold what is in effect now, in my view, a large music concert with heavy footfall and all the associated sponsorship and revenue opportunities, then I think they should find a more suitable out-of-town venue. If they want to, on the other hand, have a quiet, small community event, which is what this used to be, then I don't think residents would object to it being held in its current location. I would say I don't recall any issues occurring during the first few years of this being held. The problem, it seems to me now, is that they don't want a small community event anymore. So each year it's got louder and busier, and this year was just really extreme. Now, there was an article appeared in the local press not long after this application was submitted, and it appeared to be very much a public relations exercise talking of benefits to the community and to charities. And it actually stated organisers intend the event to be even bigger next year. I think this is the wrong direction to be heading. And it suggests to me actually a disregard for the community, because they are well aware there have been complaints. And it seems to me that as things stand at the moment, the event is simply no longer in keeping with the spirit of the intended premises licence. Organisers talk of community, but we are also community, but we don't get asked. We're just told you're going to have a load of noise, whether you like it or not. I feel it's more like now a large corporate style music event. Just for context on size, the queue to get in stretched all the way down Northcroft Lane, which has quite narrow pavements. I don't think access is suited to the numbers of people appearing at one time. Now, the committee will see submissions from many supporters of the festival. And I think it's worth pointing out that it was, of course, inevitable when you've got thousands of attendees, you're going to get many people who don't want the event to be in any way put at risk. I understand that. There are also sponsors, there are charities. They have vested interests. But many of these people do not live as close to the location as I certainly do. And even those that live nearby are going to support an event if they're attending, if they're gaining from it in some way. So, for example, a charity, I can perfectly well understand they don't want that to be put at risk. But there are other ways for charities to be supported without excess alcohol consumption and noise. It's easy to talk about charity, but let's be realistic here. Plenty of people come to a festival like this to get drunk, and it was evidenced in some of the behaviour that I witnessed. It's a beer festival. Some people are going to drink too much. Now, of course, I accept it would be unreasonable to hold organisers responsible for the behaviour of every attendee leaving the site. And I also accept many attendees do not cause any trouble at all. And it could be argued, of course, there will be antisocial behaviour expected in the centre of any town. Nevertheless, we are talking here of a very large number of people descending on quite a heavily populated residential area over an intense period of time. So even a small percentage of the total footfall is a lot of people. I wonder also if supporters would be happy to tolerate something like this directly outside their property, and I suspect generally the answer would be no. Some event supporters reference the annual fair in their submissions, and their belief that that event causes more disturbance. I think this demonstrates how easy it is for people to pick and choose what they're supporting based on personal preferences. So the attitude is very much, we like the beer festival because we go to it. We don't like the fair because it's next to us. Now, I'm not a fan of that fair either, but it doesn't produce anywhere near the volumes of noise that the beer festival does, and nor has it, to my knowledge, breached any of the conditions placed on it by the council. I further question some of the supporting statements from those claiming the event is child-friendly. I think it's one thing to perhaps have attended with young children earlier in the day when doubtless there was no problem. But those people were not leaving or were not attending at 10 o'clock or after 10 o'clock when my children had to listen to aggressive behavior and inappropriate language. Many of those supporters were doubtless at home at that time. Ironically, their children were probably tucked up in bed, which mine were not. So I don't need lectures from anybody on the fact that I'm wrong to make that judgment. There is a distinctly different atmosphere at 10 p.m. than there is during the afternoon. It's simply disingenuous to judge a licensed event on the earlier atmosphere alone. The attitude seems to be, if I didn't see it, it means it didn't happen. Well, I'm sorry, but it did, and I'm not the only one to make reference to it. I have to say, I'm not sure permitting and encouraging the consumption of alcohol in large quantities in the centre of a town like this is actually sending out the right public health message. This has also been alluded to by some submissions supporting this application. In general, though, I don't think most people would object to a quiet community event supporting real ales, which is what I believe the original licence was granted for. The issue here is the nature of the event. It's the noise, the behaviour, and the sheer number of visitors. The location, in my view, is simply no longer suitable. In fact, if we consider the statement from the attending chief scientific officer, even the organisers seem to be unable to control it. They breach their own noise conditions. Now, I believe at the very least additional restrictions should be considered here, such as, for example, requiring an earlier finish time, maybe removing the live music element, because I think that's where the problem really lies, perhaps reducing the footfall, and maybe even considering whether an event dedicated to alcohol consumption is suitable for younger children. I would say, though, and this is really the final point, that I don't really have much faith in the council's ability to enforce any conditions or restrictions that are imposed, and I do find this concerning. On this occasion, we had noise restrictions clearly breached over prolonged periods, and yet a public health officer was not even allowed on site to carry out enforcement, which is something that I think indignant supporters are not aware of when I'm condemned for calling for a review. This is not a case of a resident being awkward. It's in the report. The agreed conditions were breached. In fact, the noise levels were not too far off levels which would be deemed hazardous to hearing in the workplace. My ears were ringing by the end of the day. And I'd like to ask the committee, what is the point of restrictions if they cannot be enforced? Perhaps the only logical solution, if you can't enforce them, is to revoke the license completely, because in that case, the event would ultimately doubtless be relocated to a more suitable location, perhaps the showground, for example, where it could get as big as it wants, noise would be diffused, and everybody would be happy. I hope I've provided here a good explanation for the review application, and I appreciate these decisions are never easy. Of course, I also accept that those with other views have an equal right to be heard. But I do think evidence suggests that it is important at this point that the licence at least be fully reviewed and that consideration be given to some sort of interventions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Viper. Members, do you have any questions? Councillor Linden.
Thank you, Mr. Viper. The chairman said earlier that we have to take into account the Licensing Act of 2003's 4 objectives: prevention of crime and disorder, public safety, prevention of public nuisance, and protection of children from harm. With the exception of environmental health, we haven't received any objections from the police or our social services. So what I'd like to know is, in terms, do you have logs in terms of the amount of public nuisance and the numbers, and protection of children from harm? Because to be honest with you, I'm not just talking about this application. I do for non-events that there are people, young youths, who swear a lot outside in front of young children. There's drunks around all over the place, not just in Newbury town centre at the weekends. So what we need to look at is proportionality and what we can actually record. And obviously, I just want to know if you've got evidence you can provide us on this.
No, all I'm telling you, can you hear me? Sorry. All I'm telling you is that I experienced a large number of people leaving a premises at, I don't know, 10 o'clock, sometime around then, maybe later. And there was aggression, there was swearing, shouting, there was banging on fences. As I mentioned myself, of course, I accept this type of thing happens in general. What I'm saying is that this event encourages a lot of people who are coming out at the same time, potentially drunk. It is the nature of that type of event that it's going to encourage more of it than we might normally expect.
So do you have any numbers we're talking about? Are we talking about 10 or 20 or 100 where you've got these concerns?
I can't really put numbers on it. It was a group of people coming out of a licensed event. I'm sure organisers would be able to probably know approximately how many people had left the event at that time. There were a lot of people, in my view, leaving, but was it 50, 100? I don't know how many people had been delayed until after 10 o'clock, and how many of those were swearing, for example.
Chairman.
Councillor Pat.
Thank you, Chairman. And Mr. Viper, thank you again for your contribution. Can I just ask two quick questions? I do appreciate, of course, the organisers were trying to discourage people from driving. Drink and drive does not go together. But was there much traffic congestion that you would consider was associated with this event? It is something you haven't mentioned. And may I also ask, please, a brief summary of what action you took on the night to try to report the instances of the antisocial behaviour, as you term it, and noise at the time, and what response you had?
Well, there was nothing I could do on the night because there's no real way to do anything about behaviour like that. I mean, there isn't really any response that I could make. I intended simply to make a complaint afterwards, or the day afterwards, through the appropriate channels, which I have done now. To the first question, I'm not aware of any. You mean by traffic, I assume vehicular traffic. I'm not aware of any particular traffic issues. I don't believe it's an event that's particularly attended by people driving cars, from what I've seen.
Right, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Pask. I have one or two questions, if I may. The supporters of the event point out the benefit to the community, the town, charities, and so on, and the fact that it's only one day a year. How do you respond to that comment?
As I mentioned, I think it's very easy to use charity as a kind of argument here. Of course, it is just one day. I accept that, but it's one day that was especially disruptive and has become more so, and I'm worried will become more so without intervention. As I said, I think there are surely other ways to support charities. It's not for me to decide how, but if the organisers decided to have a midnight run to Hungerford and back, they could probably raise money that way. But I suppose, being cynical about it, would that get as much interest? Well, no, because it's far more preferable to go and drink real ale instead. I just don't think the charity argument is one that should particularly be taken into account, other than insofar as I accept that, yes, charities would lose out if there was not an event. Then again, I'm not saying there shouldn't be an event. I'm just saying it should be moderated.
Again, from what I can see of the supporters' arguments, I think there's an acknowledgement of noise and the possibility of noise disturbance. But I think they generally refute the other aspects of crime, disorder, and children's harm, and so on. You obviously believe that those things do exist.
I mean, one of the things we talk about children's harm here is not just, is a child going to be knocked down by a drunken person? I personally think that children not being able to sleep at 10 o'clock is harmful to young children. And that was the case that I experienced. My children could not sleep. And actually, I would say there were others, because I read other submissions here, that others claimed their children were also disrupted by it. So clearly it was too loud. I don't know whether, personally, I'm not sure that children should be at a licensed event like that. I accept that many might say, well, there's no real problem with that. Perhaps it should be considered whether they should be there that late, potentially. I'm not saying they all were, but maybe from the experience I had, that perhaps they shouldn't be permitted there at 9 or 10 o'clock at night. Maybe in the afternoon it was okay. I'm just raising it as what I think is an issue.
Thank you for your answers. Can I just check at this point in time again that people can hear the exchanges and the responses? Okay, thank you. Can I now invite other groups to have any questions for the applicant? Would you indicate either physically or through a Zoom hand if you have a question? I see no physical hands nor Zoom hands, so thank you. Can I now then move to the licence holder, Sarah Dartfield, and can I just check whether you have 10 minutes, who will be speaking on your behalf, or will you be speaking or splitting the time?
Well, Chair, good morning again. We will try and split this time, I think, between the two of us, Mr. Dutfield on my right and myself. That's probably the best I can offer. In terms of time, we will, of course, try and keep to 10 minutes, but I'm conscious there is a lot of material here. I would do my best to refer you to parts of the bundle and the committee papers, if that will assist to try and truncate things. But it'll be a
how you use the time is up to you. But
I'm grateful. So, sir, yes, my name's Mr. Payne. I am the legal representative of the licence holder in this particular matter. Councillors who've come across me before, and I'm conscious I've been at hearings here before, will also be aware that in a former career I was an environmental health officer and indeed manager of an environmental health service and a licensing service within a local authority, but not this one. First of all, I need to make the point quite clearly that the licence holder does not resolve from the position that there were problems with noise during the last event. Those are clearly documented within the pack, and there is an unreserved apology for any inconvenience and disturbance that was caused. There is no intention whatsoever on part of the organisers of this event to cause disturbance or inconvenience to anybody in the locality or beyond. That's simply not the ethos of this particular event. What the ethos of this event is to, well, you'll hear from Mr. Dutfield in a moment, but is to provide a community event in a responsible and proactive way. And you will see from the papers that the event has gone to significant measures by producing an event management plan. And that event management plan on this last event went through the safety advisory group, with which you will be, of course, entirely aware, and was considered by the safety advisory group. The proposals were considered by your Environmental Health Service, and you'll hear from them later in relation to that. And measures were indeed put into place to prevent problems from occurring. What I will say also from the outset, and councillors, you will have picked up on this, is that the event very strenuously denies that it is involved in promoting crime and disorder, and that is involved in promoting harm to children. That is absolutely not the case. So you've heard no specific evidence in relation to that. And it is disappointing that such measures are raised when there are such precautions in place on the site to make sure that children are protected and that crime and disorder is minimised. And you will hear about the lack of incidents from me a little later on in this presentation. So it would probably be helpful for you to hear about the event from Ms. Dutfield on my right to explain about what the event is and how it's organised. So if I could hand over to her to talk a little bit about that.
Thank you. The event was conceived 18 years ago by a group of players from Newbury and Thatcham Hockey Club wanting to raise money for the construction of a new clubhouse and for local charities. The focus of the event has remained to provide a safe and family-friendly environment for the local community to enjoy, whilst raising as much money as possible for our identified local good causes. And since it began, we've donated over £100,000 to local charities. A group of 8 people, including some who've been involved since the beginning, organise the whole event. We do this voluntarily, spending around 2,000 hours of our own time to make sure the event can happen. Staffing on the day is done voluntarily by members of Newbury and Thatcham Hockey Club. This includes the setup, which takes 4 days, and the takedown, which is done within 12 hours of the event finishing to allow Newbury Cricket Club to play on the wicket at 11 o'clock the following morning. We employ specialists for matters where we do not have the expertise, such as erecting the marquees, building the scaffolding, first aid and healthcare, and security. We take our responsibility seriously, and we regularly seek feedback on the event from the public, our sponsors, and statutory bodies to improve the event and the experience for all. There's just a few facts that I'd like to highlight from the past 18 years. No under 18s are allowed on site unaccompanied. There has never been a security incident requiring police intervention. There's never been an injury requiring paramedic call out. We sell drinks in half-pint measures only. No one can consume more than half a pint at any one time. And the average consumption over the last 6 years per person has been 3 pints over the course of the event. The capacity has remained the same for the past 10 years. We only allow 5,000 people on site at any one time. And by the end of the evening this year, we had around 1,500 people remaining on site. We have a dedicated hotline on the day, staffed throughout the event for any issues that arise. And if we are made aware of any issues, remedial action is taken immediately. Thank you.
Chair, I'm conscious that one of the main issues that has been raised is that of noise at this particular event. And in the bundle that we've provided to you, there's perhaps some helpful information about noise precautions that are taken at this event. And you'll see that there is a monitoring programme that takes place, and that sound levels were agreed with your Environmental Health Service before the event. Those sound levels that were agreed don't form a licence condition. They are an agreement between the Environmental Health Service and the organiser. And they are based, as you will gather, on the code of practice that has been, I think it's fair to say, in draft form for many a year, and now seems to have been adopted as a code. And you'll see that in the bundle that we've provided on page 81. I've printed the guidelines at section 3 of that, which talks about the music noise levels when assessed at the prediction stage or measured during sound checks or concerts should not exceed the guidelines shown below. Importantly, this talks about events taking place between 9 a.m. and 11 p.m. The events that we are looking at this event primarily finish by 9:30 p.m. and certainly music will finish by 10 o'clock as happened on this last occasion. You will see that there is a 65 decibel limit talked about there, but I make the point that that is an event for events going up to 11 o'clock at night, so some 1 hour later, when noise is, of course, much more of importance. That's not to say that the noise limit should be any higher. The noise limit should be achievable, and indeed could have been achievable at this event. You will have seen that there were interactions from your Environmental Health Service with the event, and it's regrettable that the message didn't really get through to the right people at the right time about reducing the levels. And we can do something about that. Frankly, there is no issue, and it has been the case that your council has a contact number for the event manager and the site manager, and a call to that individual would have coordinated. Unfortunately, that didn't happen on this particular occasion. But you will see that there were measures taken to reduce the sound and to prevent problems from occurring. That is backed up by regular monitoring that is done by the event to make sure that problems do not occur. And I would urge you, when you're looking at the logs, to be very careful in the numbers that are portrayed, because you have numbers there from the monitoring which are both in front or behind the sound system and at the closest residential property, as I understand. or at the monitoring points rather, that were agreed. Now, noise can be a complicated and difficult thing, and that's why at page 82, we've introduced a relatively available thermometer of noise, which shows the sorts of level we're talking about here, 75 decibels being that on this thermometer of a washing machine. Now, what I do not say is that this is an absolute, but it's an indication of the sorts of levels that should be tried to achieve, and it gives a flavour of what's being obtained. I emphasise that the event will do everything that it can to make sure that people are not disturbed. And to that end, we propose that the way of dealing with this application is actually to ensure that those, should they be disturbed, can contact the event and arrange for sound levels to be reduced. And if I can take you to that document that you received overnight, you will see that I've proposed two conditions. Number one, where a resident living within 1 mile of radius of the premises notifies
Sorry to interrupt, there's just 1 minute left to go.
Yes, I'll be as quick as I can. In writing, they wish to receive the details, names and times of events. The licence holder shall include a person in the notification of event circulation that is set out with the event management plan. So that's, we will notify people in advance of what's happened. And then importantly, the licence holder shall make available a telephone number that should be attended and answered while the event is in progress. And then it talks about how that number should be publicised. So this matter could have been resolved by a telephone call to the right person at the right time, and action would have been taken. I emphasise the point that this is an event that does not want to cause disturbance. It does not want to cause inconvenience to those in the locality. But the reality is that the monitoring that they undertook did not indicate a problem. When they knew that there was a problem, it was resolved. In that respect, what we say is that you as a committee will be looking at this in terms of the root causes. What were the root causes of the problem this year? What are the root causes generally? Their communication, and that is really the sum of it all. So I'm conscious that I've tried to rattle through, and there's probably a million things that I haven't talked about in the time available. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you. Councillor Patch.
Chairman, thank you. There are a number of issues here, are there not? As you rightly describe, that noise is a major issue as a part of the objection to what happened earlier this year. Now, I was never an environmental health officer, but I do understand from my professional life how the measurement of volume in that using decibels is a logarithmic scale, and that a small increase of only 1 or 2 decibels is actually quite noticeable. I would urge that there is more than just noise volume, but it's the frequency of the noise, whether there's an underlying drum beat or whatever. Could I just ask you 2 questions? From the pack, I understand and would like a further explanation as to why a stage appears to have been orientated in a different direction this year from previous years. The implication is, from what I have read, and I have reread it to try to establish what had happened, was that the stage was pointing more towards houses than away from them. I appreciate there are walls around which reflect noise. I would also like you to pursue, I can remind you of these points if need be as you answer, but I would also like to know what, it's very, very good you having a hotline for people to ask you to turn the volume down. The disappointment is there's no point in having a hotline if the message doesn't get through and action is taken. Could you comment further, please?
Yes, absolutely. So to deal with the stage orientation point, there is one word that explains why that orientation changed. It was coronavirus. essentially, the advice that had been received by the event meant that the spacing arrangements on the site had to be changed, and that necessitated a turn of the stage in order to accommodate those spacing arrangements. That is the sole reason for it. That was notified, and that was something that the council was aware of before the event took place, and was done purely to accommodate the coronavirus protections. That's the only reason. In terms of the frequency, so that the spectrum, the profile of the noise, yes, drum beat is quite important, especially, and the low frequencies are quite important, especially over distance. And that forms part of the assessment and the projections that are put into the noise management plan before the event takes place. So calculations are done on the levels that can be achieved, both accounting for high frequency and low frequency noise. So that absolutely is something that's being considered. And that is a proposal that went forward, I believe, to the Safety Advisory Group to start off with. I make the point that over the years that this event has been taking place, this is the first occasion where we've had significant numbers of complaints. And indeed, there have been issues raised by the Environmental Health Officer, as I understand, in relation to the noise levels that were perceived, and it was purely to do with a reorientation, and that is something that will be considered, and I'd imagine the previous arrangement will be returned to for future years if you're intending to allow the license. Sorry, there was one other point which I thought I'd noted down, but I hadn't. Oh, the hotline.
The hotline,
yes, indeed. Yes, the difficulty is if that hotline is not called, then numbers that are given to, no, let me try that again. It is important that if action is to be taken, the structure that is within the event management plan is regarded, and the hotline number needs to be called, not any other number that might exist, such as a friend of a friend of a friend, which I think happened on one occasion. But if the report is put through in the correct way to the correct number, that hotline number, the structure that is in place within the event management plan will take care of it. The reality is there were no calls to that hotline number. If there had been, it could have been actioned.
Chairman, in that case, could I just ask as a supplementary, because I think this is an important point, having a hotline, how well, and again, I emphasize I have read the papers, but how well was that hotline number distributed? How many people are likely to have known which number to phone as opposed to your friends of a friend or any other number for that matter? How widely available was it?
I can pick that one up. So we printed 1,500 leaflets and distributed them to the local community for the roads that's shown in the noise management plan in the week before the event. And that has on it both the email address that is available and will be looked at throughout, and a mobile phone number, which is the hotline number dedicated for it.
Thank you.
Chair, if I could also just interject one point, and that is something that we recognise could be tightened on the licence, which is why we have suggested the condition that the telephone number should be on the material that's published. It should be on the event website, and certainly, as already happens, it should be notified to the local authority.
Okay. Councillor Linden.
Thank you, Chairman. Ms. Dupfield, can I ask you a question on page 328, which concerns the Environmental Health Officer, Mr. Davidson? He attempted to speak to you, and I have read the papers that you wouldn't have refused to see him had you been notified. Have you contacted security to find out why he was unable to contact you?
Yes, I have. I've spoken to our security provider who we've used for the last 15 years. I'm not saying in any way that Mr. Davison didn't, but they have no record from any of their staff that that request was put forward. So I can't take it any further. I don't know the situation.
Had you known, you would have readily seen him.
Absolutely. And our phone numbers were all available to him.
Right. is accessed. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Yes, I have 2 questions. We've talked about notification and action to be taken. As I understand the report from the environmental health officer, he did notify people on site more than once, and action I think was taken. But it seemed to me that the action was reversed and the sound levels were raised again. So what level of management control can you actually have when you have live bands and subcontractors controlling the sound?
Well, so absolutely. The point that I make is the one I've made before, is that the message needs to be given to the right place. There's no point talking to a security guard about sound levels, because that's something that's beyond their experience and beyond their brief. What is important is that the message is communicated to the site manager or to Ms. Dutfield to make sure that the right people can take the action. Security guard has no ability to deal with anything other than access to the event. Now, had the message got through to the site manager and to Ms. Dutfield, much stronger action could have been taken. But the simple fact of the matter is they weren't aware of the attempts to contact them. If they had, they would have dealt with it. Now, there was attempts, and there were quite rightly contacts made with those providing the sound system, but at the end of the day, they are not the ones that are in control of the site. And that is the point of having a management structure, having the structure that you see within the event management plan. And it's about chain of command. Those that are in control of the site need to know and need to be able to take action. And if they do know, they will take action.
Were the sound managers aware that the environmental officer was monitoring as well as your own people?
Yes, they were. They'd met with Mr. Davison on the Friday and had a discussion about it. And I know they discussed, they had a conversation, retrospectively, I know they discussed it, met at least twice on site on the Saturday as well.
The implications were that the implementation of the noise management plan wasn't quite as the plan was agreed. Do you have any comments on that?
Well, there were problems. We don't resolve from that at all. There were problems with the sound levels. That was explained to be due to a number of technical issues that the event suffered in trying to set up the sound system. It was due to the reorientation of the stage. And the point that I make is that if that reorientation is changed back to the previous arrangement, that should resolve the matter. But the reality on the night was that there were some technical issues that made it difficult to comply with those sound levels. That said, attempts were made and continued attempts were made throughout the evening to reduce those levels.
So what assurances can you make to members of the public that those technical issues won't recur?
Well, of course, there is no assurance that can be given that any technical issue will never occur. That's the nature of technology. Technology will go wrong. But the question is, what will happen if it does go wrong? Will the event management make sure that problems don't recur to local residents? Yes, that's clear. Now, this review has, of course, heightened the awareness and the sensitivity of the management to the problems that exist. And that was not sufficiently identified before this review application came in. You'll be aware of your licensing policy that talks about people who have got issues with licensed premises, raising them with the premises before bringing a review. That's not what happened here. We've kind of leapt into a review. But that said, the review has provided an opportunity to refocus and to make sure that there are precautions in place to prevent these problems from recurring again. As I've said, they have not occurred to the extent that we had the problems this year, and that was primarily due to the reorientation of the stage and the technical issues that arose because of that. The reassurance is if the stage is put back to the way that it was before and the sound systems are put back to the way they were before, we are in a situation where sound can absolutely be controlled.
Thank you. Can I ask if other members of the meeting have a Councillor Pascal?
Chairman, thank you for allowing me to come back. And if you disallow this question, I will understand. But one learns when organising events. One learns from experience and, dare I say, the comments that are made afterwards. It isn't for me to indicate what sort of music, if any, is likely to be played. But I believe that one of the bands there was it called Hell's Bells, which, if my memory serves me correctly, is that not an AC/DC tribute band? And I'm sure that many are familiar with the sort of heavy rock music they play, and I'm sure it's very popular. Have you considered other forms of music, more acoustic, more, let's say, gentle on the ear? And I go back to the question, it's not just volume, it's the frequency of the beat that is important. It isn't for us to dictate what sort of music. I'm just asking what consideration you've given.
Thank you. I can pick that one up, Chair. Yes, so every year we look at providing what we consider to be a good mix of music and a good mix of acts. And I think on the basis of what we've learned from this year, we will be looking at that again and looking at what we think will be appropriate for those later events, for those later acts during the event.
Thank you. Sorry, can I then invite anyone else on the meeting who wishes to ask a question?
The hotline that you mentioned, and I would say at this point, I didn't receive any information. I do accept that we have a gate which perhaps makes access to the premises difficult, but I don't believe that sufficient effort was certainly made to provide me with information. I had none. But even the mobile, even calling on a phone, as you mentioned, you know, with the levels of noise that are going on, I question whether it's even possible to hear the phone. So I'm not fully convinced, actually, that that is a real solution. I accept what you're trying to say. You're more aware of it now. I'm just concerned that even with that in place, it doesn't guarantee that the phone's going to be answered and that action is going to be taken. And once it's done, of course, the issue you have then is that it's a premises license for one day event. Once it's over, it's over. You can kind of say, okay, well, it's just another year off now. And many people probably did, which is probably I'm unusual for actually taking the initiative here. But you need to consider whether in reality that is actually going to work, I think, in practice.
Chair, I'm conscious that those are submissions rather than a question, but I'll try and work an answer to a question within that. Will having a mobile phone on site work? Yes, because mobile phones can be used with headsets. They can be put on to vibrate. They can be answered in a quiet environment. And as to the fact that it's a temporary event, it's one night a year. Well, that really emphasises the need to report problems as and when they occur, not afterwards, so they can be resolved then and there. But yes, having a mobile phone on events is workable. You will appreciate that I deal with a number of festivals and events throughout the country where mobile phones are used for exactly this purpose. And indeed, there are some licensed premises within your area which have a condition about mobile phones or a contact telephone number. Indeed, some of them I have acted on. So it is absolutely a system that works and can be relied on.
Thank you. Does anyone else have a question for the licence holder or the solicitor? No? Can I check again that everyone has heard that exchange of questions and responses? Thank you very much. We turn next to supporters of the event. Can I just check who wishes to speak? Are you sharing that time with Mr. Pollack, or you are? Okay, fine. So you have 10 minutes between you. Can I ask you to introduce yourselves and to make your presentation?
Yeah, I think Chair, I think it's Tim Polak. I think I was going to go first and then hand over to Melissa after a few minutes.
Fine,
So-
whatever you wish.
Yep. So my name is Tim Polak. I'm a resident of Newbury, and I want to talk to the social and community benefits of the Newbury Real Ale Festival. For transparency, I was unable to attend this year's event because I was taking my daughter to university, but I've been to every festival since 2013. At festivals where I have attended, I've seen no evidence of crime, disorder, or children's harm. The festival is a great social event for Newbury. It's an ideal opportunity for people to come together and socialise. It's an occasion for many family groups and groups of friends to get together, and that's clear on the day. It's not just hardened drinkers. It's people who want to come together and socialise, meet up with friends, meet up with family. It's also a family event. Many families do go along, and groups of families get together, set up their gazebos, put their rugs out and enjoy the day. Children are well catered for. There's soft drinks, there's a tuck shop, and I'm sure there's been face painted in some years. And as mentioned, children, of course, can only come with adults, so they are well supervised. And it's very transparent that alcohol will be served at the event. So no adult who brings their child can be under any illusions. I'd also point out there are many events these days where children turn up and there is alcohol drunk. And in fact, that's true of most pubs at most weekends. And that certainly does not imply that children are at risk or at harm. The festival also brings people to the town from outside the area, which is obviously good for local businesses. If I can share an anecdotal example of my own group of friends and family, when I've been along, it's been in a group of about 6 or 7, of which I'm the only one from Newbury. The rest are family and friends who come from outside town. After the festival, we've always gone into town, either to a pub or to a restaurant, and therefore spent money in the town as well, which is sorely needed. And even with locals, the festival brings residents into the town centre. Attendees like the fact they're supporting local charities. They like the fact the event is run by volunteers, as we've heard, and it's certainly not a profit-making corporate festival. Attendees also like the fact they are supporting local businesses. So they're supporting local breweries. Many of the beers come from local microbreweries. They're supporting local bands, particularly some of the bands during the afternoon are up-and-coming bands who are trying to make it on the band circuit, and they're supporting local traders through their food stalls. In summary, I think the Newbury Real Ale Festival is an ideal event for Newbury in terms of size and setup, and the town would be worse off if events like this cannot take place. And furthermore, it'd be surely difficult to justify other loud events, such as those in the town centre or at the racecourse, if the Ale Festival were not allowed to continue. Thank you, and I'm obviously happy to take questions. I'll now hand over to Melissa.
Thanks, Tim. Just to introduce myself, I'm Melissa Hughes. I'm Chief Exec of Newbury Business Improvement District. We're a not-for-profit organisation. We look after the Visit Newbury brand, and our vision is to establish Newbury as a go-to destination for businesses and visitors from all around the world, with a real focus on improving the local trading environment and creating a more vibrant town centre. We were one of the headline sponsors of the Newbury Real Ale Festival this year, and we chose to do this because the festival is a key event in Newbury's calendar and one which brings a great number of economic and social benefits to the town centre. Family-friendly, community-focused events such as this festival help to put Newbury on the map as a vibrant place to live, work and visit, whilst helping to raise funds for local good causes. Footfall in the town centre on the day of the festival was up 16% on the previous Saturday. And that's bearing in mind that actually the previous Saturday was our Newbury Food and Drink Festival in Northbrook Street and Bartholomew Street. So that was even a busy Saturday in itself, but it was up 16% because of the Newbury Real Ale Festival. Local businesses benefit from this increased footfall, particularly the hospitality industry. Anecdotal feedback from town centre businesses shows an increase in custom for hotels, restaurants, pubs and cafes across the weekend of the festival. And the event is also very important to local brewers and local musicians who can showcase themselves to a large audience. As I'm sure you're aware, town centres are evolving, and vibrant events such as this festival help to create a strong sense of place, bringing the community together and giving people reasons to visit the town. There's a real demand for outdoor events in Newbury, which is evidenced by the popularity of the events we organise in the town centre and those organised by the Corn Exchange. These all take place in residential areas because more and more town centre properties have been converted to residential. For example, the Food and Drink Festival predominantly took place on Bartholomew Street, where you've now got retirement flats and lots of residential apartments. This is what the majority of people want from Newbury: music, arts and culture on their doorstep, with the use of public open space being maximised. This is evident in the results of the recent Newbury Town Centre Master Plan survey, which also made the point that actually event space is limited in the town centre, and it's really important to have space for events in town and them not taking place outside of town on places like Newbury Showground, where the town centre won't benefit from them. I would be very concerned about any precedent set if this licence were revoked or onerous conditions were added, and the impact this could have on other town centre events, which, as I mentioned, all take place in residential areas. I've personally attended the event for many years and have never once felt concerned about my own safety or that of anyone at the event. The event management team do a fantastic job and help to ensure that Newbury maintains its reputation as a safe and welcoming place for people to live, work and visit. I know how important the objectives of the Licensing Act are to ensuring that events run smoothly and that attendees are safeguarded, and I have no concerns about the management of this event. I wouldn't have recommended that we put the Visit Newbury name to the event if I did have any concerns. And just, I suppose, to put it in context, really, we've talked about this being a one-day event. It actually takes place for about 10 hours, so 12 noon till 10 p.m, which represents about 0.1% of the hours in the year. So that means there's 99.9% of the time when this event isn't taking place in Northcroft Park. It seems, you know, I would think from all the benefits that the town centre gains from having this event there, that it's a reasonable amount of time for it to be taking place at that location close to the town centre. That's everything. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Members, any questions? I have one question, if I may. It's been suggested by the applicant that rather than not have the event, to have it relocated where it would not be such a exposure to residents. Do you believe that that would have a similar level of success if it was relocated somewhere further out of the town?
It certainly wouldn't have the same benefits that it has for the town centre. And also, one of the great things about having it where it is the fact that people can easily walk there or easily travel by train to come to the event in the town centre. If it was located somewhere like the Showground, you really can't get there without driving. And it wouldn't work somewhere like that. I think it has to be a town centre based event. It has to be accessible to visitors from outside the town by train and by public transport. And it has to be accessible to local residents who are able to walk into town and enjoy it on their doorstep.
Thank you. Councillor Linden?
Yes, because in terms, obviously I can't speak on previous events I've sat on, but of course if it was out of town, you still get the amplification of noise and all the rest of it. So to doing so, but obviously it is, as you've said, a benefit to the town, because obviously the chairman and myself obviously have the Reading Festival close by, and that is a fair distance away and doesn't always benefit traders as such, as people tend to go on this grounds. But this event does obviously help the town centre because it's relatively close and easy to get to.
Councillor Linden, are you asking a question?
Yeah, that's what I'm asking a question to reaffirm that.
Yeah, absolutely. The town centre does really benefit from this event. We represent sort of all of the businesses within the business improvement district. The hospitality businesses in particular see an increase in trade, but generally there was an increase in footfall in the town centre, and it's easy for people to pop into town centre shops and things if they're coming into town for an event.
Thank you very much.
Chair, can I also answer that point? We heard earlier that I think the average beer consumption is 3 pints per person, which would suggest that, and I think this is true, that some people go to the event for just a few hours, not for the full 10 hours. They might just go for a few hours in the afternoon or the evening. And I'm sure if the event was outside town, then that would not be the case. People would not track out, for example, to the Showground just for 2 or 3 hours, where they would if it was in Northbrook Park. Thank you.
Thank you for that response. Can I ask if any other members of this meeting have a question for the supporters of the event? I see no indication. Can I now move, therefore, to the responsible authority, which in that case is the Environmental Health, and invite Mr. Russell Davidson to introduce himself and make a presentation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. My name is Russell Davidson, and I'm a Senior Scientific Officer within the Public Protection Partnership. I've been working in environmental health for over 18 years. Environmental Health were notified of an application to review the Newbury Real Ale Festival, and subsequently have made a representation due to the failure of the event to prevent a public nuisance from occurring as a result of elevated noise levels being emitted from the site, as witnessed by myself. The Newbury Real Ale Festival occurred on September 2021 with live music and recorded music being permitted from midday to 10 p.m. as per the premise licence. Premise licence contains conditions requested by Environmental Health, which are designed to limit noise and prevent disturbance to nearby residential properties. The day before the event, an on-site meeting was held where noise limits, monitoring arrangements, stage setup, speakers, etc. were discussed and agreed. This year, the stage was facing Newbury Town Centre, which was different to the previous event in 2019 and different to what was detailed in the previously submitted and accepted 2021 noise management plan, which I had reviewed and agreed in July 2021. I was also advised that this year the sound and stage arrangements had been contracted to UK Stage Events with Mr. James Hollenby in overall responsibility for sound compliance and monitoring requirements during the event. This was again different to what had been previously specified in the noise management plan. A noise limit of 65 dBA, LAQ 15 minutes, was agreed with the compliance point being the facade of a block of flats known as Bewick's Reach, Northcroft Lane, around 238 metres opposite the main stage. The agreed noise limit of 65 dBA, LAQ 15 minutes, comes from the music noise level specified in the Noise Council's Code of Practice on Environmental Noise Control at Concerts. On the day of the event, noise monitoring was undertaken at the agreed compliance point from around 6:30 p.m. to the event finishing at 10 p.m. using a calibrated Class 1 sound level meter. The weather was bright, sunny with little wind. No other noise sources were audible during the monitoring period. Elevated noise levels were recorded throughout the event, despite contact having been made with the sound technicians and also attempted with Sarah Dutfield, the DPS, to try and get the noise levels reduced to the agreed noise limit. Although a reduction in levels was achieved, the noise limit was not reached. I found the noise levels being monitored surprising, given that this was now the evening. I would have expected the correct noise levels to have been achieved during the initial sound checking and testing, which according to the noise management plan would have been undertaken at 9:30 a.m. on the day of the event. Following the event, 5 complaints were received from Environmental Health regarding the elevated noise levels from the event, the furthest complaint being 2.7 kilometres away. Historically, very few noise complaints have been received by Environmental Health since the event gained a premise licence for its current location, with only 2 complaints being received in 2015. The applicant has stated that elevated noise levels were due to technical issues and stage orientation, rather than relying on the communication from people regarding these elevated noise levels. The fact of the matter is the noise levels should have been correct at the start and throughout the event through sound checking, not relying on people phoning up and relying on the Environmental Health Officer in order to reduce these noise levels. In conclusion, the premise licence contains sufficient conditions, in our opinion, in order to control the noise emitted from this site during the event. However, on this occasion, a failure by the contracted sound technicians, engineers, to control the level of noise being emitted during this event led to excessive noise levels being recorded and noise complaints to the council being received. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Davidson. Councillor Pace, you have a question?
Right. Chairman, a factual question first and a layman's question to follow. Thank you, Mr. Davidson. You've explained the way in which you approached the request for this to take place with agreed levels. Were you or any of your team available and able to be in the vicinity or attend and respond to any complaints that were made? the layman's question is quite simple, I think. Is it not just a case of turning a volume control down to minimise the impact of the noise to reach the agreed levels? And were you successful? Well, clearly it is alleged that you weren't successful, but were you able to make contact with the organisers just to ask them to turn the volume down?
Thank you, Councillor Pask. Several points to reply. My sole function there was to monitor the agreed noise levels. The council doesn't operate an out-of-hours service, so we have no way of telling of complaints from the general public. My role there was to monitor the agreed noise levels that were agreed the previous day. Attempts were made, and a site visit was made on the day of the event, on the evening of the event, just after Hell's Bells had finished, basically to advise that the noise limits were not being reached as per agreement. Text messages were exchanged as well during the first live music in order to try and get the noise levels down. Again, noise levels were reduced, but again didn't reach the agreed noise level limits that we had agreed. Obviously, there was a large gap between Hell's Bells finishing and the main act of the event, Reef, playing. Again, a text message was sent to James Holmby when this first started, advising that the noise levels were far too high. And an attempt was made to speak to Sarah Dutfield. In my opinion, I made a decision that I did have Sarah's mobile phone number, but in my opinion, the noise levels were too high for a mobile phone to be heard. So I made my way to the entrance of the site, which was very close to where I was monitoring, where I spoke to the security guards, because in my opinion, it would be easier to get Sarah Dutfield contacted through the emergency radios. Contact was made, and I was told that that Sarah Dutfield was busy and I was not allowed to attend site. So I just returned back to my monitoring position to continue monitoring of the noise levels.
Sorry, and the layman's question had a serious intent behind it. Is it really just a case of twisting a knob to turn the volume down, in your opinion?
It's a bit more complicated that you have to adjust sound levels, but these people are experts and should be well versed in meeting noise levels. As I said, the event should have been the noise level should have been sorted out at 9:30 in the morning, and not waiting until intervention was made from Environmental Health Officer.
Thank you.
Councillor Linden.
Mr. Davison, do you have the right of entry anyway with your ID card so that you would be able to go in and demand to see any organiser at the event?
That is correct. We have powers of entry to enter the site, but I did not feel that was appropriate on the night.
Thank you, Chairman.
Can I ask, Mr. Davison, it's clear from the papers in the pack that the monitoring done by the consultant employed by the festival and your monitoring do not agree in terms of sound levels perceived. Do you have any view as to why there was that difference?
I can't comment on that. I can only comment on what I was monitoring. Obviously, I was standing further back, so I'd expected noise levels to be less because I was further away. Obviously, if they were standing closer, the noise level should have been higher. I was using a Class 1 noise level meter, which is the best you can use. Calibrated. I can only comment on the noise monitoring that I was doing.
I understand that, but you said earlier that you'd have expected the the organisers and the sound management engineers to be able to keep the sound level to the agreed levels. And it seems to me that if they're recording, if the paper we received is accurate in terms of their recording, part of the reason they didn't take action themselves was because they were not perceiving the same problem that you were.
Perhaps that is the case. It depends on what they're measuring as well. There's no indices on the log that noise monitoring log that they submitted. They were only showing 65 dB, but that could well be just an instantaneous measurement rather than a LEQ measurement, which is averaged over a 15-minute period.
Okay, thank you. Can I ask if anyone else has a question for our environmental health officer? So.
Yes, if I could, just one, just to really pick up on the point that I think that you made earlier, from your perspective as the professional acoustics expert in this hearing, you're satisfied, are you, that the conditions on the licence are sufficient for purposes? I think that's what you said.
Yes, that's correct. We believe that the conditions on the licence are perfectly acceptable. They were set back in 2015 and agreed, and they're perfectly capable of for this event and being achieved.
And of course, I'm sure you will agree with the councillor's point that the question of noise. I'm sorry, I'm perhaps putting that slightly directly. It should be through you, Chair. Where the officer is happy that the question of noise and particularly the frequency and the characteristics of the sound can be controlled by the agreement that is specified in the conditions.
Yes, because the noise levels can be agreed beforehand.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm grateful.
Thank you. Mr. Barrett, I see you have a hand raised. I'm afraid I didn't introduce you earlier in the meeting as I didn't spot you, but do you have a question? It's one of the supporters of the event. Mr. Barrett, can you hear me? Mr. Barrett, are you there?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Apologies. It's a question about something that's been bothering me. Mr. Davidson attended the site on the Friday to approve the setup. Knowing that a different part of the council apparently had asked for the stage to be moved, I'm still confused as to why it wasn't identified at that point that the stage position was likely to cause an exceedance, and that was contrary to the noise management plan, but for some reason was there was nothing else happened. It seems odd to me that someone with Mr. Davidson's experience didn't anticipate that this would have been a foreseeable consequence of the instruction to move the stage.
I was unaware that the stage had been moved. It's a responsibility of the applicant. If there are any changes to the noise management plan, it's a responsibility of the applicant to submit any changes within 14 days. Within 14 days of the event, of any changes to the original noise management plan. So the responsibility is on the applicant to provide any changes to myself, like the council, and even if the stage was different and orientated, it's a simple case of the noise experts for the site to adjust those levels to meet the noise limit.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for our environmental health officer? I see none. Thank you very much. Again, sorry to keep repeating this. Can I just check that everyone has heard that exchange? I'll now invite the ward member, Councillor Martha Vickers, to introduce herself and make her presentation.
Thank you, Chair. Chairman and colleagues, I'm the ward member for Newbury Central, and I'm also the Town Council member for Newbury Westfields, which is quite close to where this event took place. I live in Craven Road, which is on the Westfields estate, so I'm well aware of the Newbury Real Ale Festival and how it's received by the local community. I've only attended the event on 2 occasions, but I'm very conscious of how popular it is. After such a difficult few years, it was great to see happy expectant groups heading for the event while it was on. So it really gave me a lot of pleasure to see how people were able to actually socialise and get together again. The committee would have seen that of the comments received, there's an overwhelming support for the festival. Having said this, I think we should thank Mr. Wiper for initiating this review. It seems very timely. There are obviously some aspects that could be improved, but hopefully this can be done through negotiations with the providers. There's been a serious allegation that children might be at risk at the festival, but there seems to be no support for this concern from the community at large and no report of any specific incidents, and children's safeguarding and the police have not expressed any concern. As regards the level of noise, this is something that needs closer monitoring. My own experience is that it seemed louder this year, but I was not disturbed beyond 10:30 p.m. in the evening. The survey initiated by the Local Community Matters Facebook page has put forward some useful suggestions which hopefully can be considered by the provider. And these include the provision of more toilets, particularly at exits, looking at the effect of the orientation of the stage on the level of sound, which has been discussed extensively, having quieter music, particularly towards the end of the event, which again has been raised, actually having announcements during the event and maybe even printed on the ticket, encouraging people to behave considerately, particularly on leaving the event, and family-friendly areas away from the beer tent. These all seem quite sensible suggestions, which hopefully will be considered. There have been comments related to the lack of a police presence during the festival. This would be beneficial, or at the very least, a close liaison between the security team and the police. Hopefully this is the case, although police has not been mentioned during this discussion. In summary, I welcome the review, but hope that closer adherence to the existing terms of the licence is all that is required. I'd also like to comment that there has been some discussion about moving the event out of town, but if possible, I would strongly support the event staying in the town centre where it is, mainly because people can walk to the event. It's really used extensively by the local community. And also, as has been mentioned, it brings business into the town centre. Can I also add that I've received a comment from the Newbury Town Council, which was made following its Planning and Highways Committee recently. They say, we support this event. However, we recommend a review be carried out, focusing on the level of noise and public nuisance, as well as on toilet facilities. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Vickers. Members, do we have any questions of Councillor Vickers? I have none. Do any other groups or members of the meeting have any questions for the councillor? Again, I see none. So for the last time, hopefully for the last time, can I check that everyone heard that exchange? Thank you. Right, I would now like to wrap up this meeting by inviting first the applicant and then the licence holder if they have any comments that they'd like to address in conclusion, having heard all the submissions this morning. Mr. Wiper.
Thank you.
I don't really have anything to add. The points I raised in the application, I think, are very valid, especially with regards to the noise. I think everybody accepts that there have been issues and they need to be put right. I'm not fully convinced that they can so easily be put right. I suppose personally, I would rather see the event move to another location. From a purely selfish point of view, I would say that the way that the music hits the building in which I live in my garden, I was probably where it's hit the most, just looking at it myself where the stage was. So perhaps I am more likely to have been inconvenienced. I accept, however, that other people do want it to continue. So, and of course, we live in a democracy. I'm not suggesting that my view is the only view. I would just urge some intervention to take place to at least ensure that in the future we don't have to suffer from these types of noise at volume levels. In terms of the antisocial behavior element, I think it's been skirted over a little bit. I accept it's a minority issue, but I still don't think that it is acceptable to have people being aggressive in the street when they're leaving an event. I know you can't stop it all, but I think that something needs to be looked at in terms of maybe stewarding or something. That's really all I have to say on it. I appreciate everybody's time. We've all taken time out to attend this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Chair, I'm grateful. I have a little bit to go through in terms of summing up. But of course, this hearing in itself, if I can start with, has to have regard to the Secretary of State's guidance, your own statement of licensing policy, and indeed the legislation surrounding this particular type of application. So you will have had a copy of some of the case law that I'd like to refer to. And probably to start off, if I can deal with the technical aspects first, the case of Thwaites, which I'm sure as licensing members you'll be entirely familiar with, which talks about the need to provide evidence. Well, if I can deal with the two aspects, or three of the licensing objectives indeed, one, public safety, 2, crime and disorder, 3, protection of children from harm. So I would suggest to you that you have very little, if any, evidence in relation to those matters. Indeed, one of your members kindly raised this point and gave the opportunity for the applicant to produce evidence, but could not even say how many people were coming and going from the event to cause disturbance. So in those respects, what we say is there is no evidence to justify any action under the Licensing Act. The duty, of course, of the committee is to look at the root causes of these issues that are relevant. And what I say is that they are really to do with noise and disturbance. And of course, paragraph 1120 of the Secretary of State's guidance talks about that. And it talks about looking at the root causes and acting proportionately. And that is the key, acting proportionately to the issues that have been raised. And just to elaborate on some case law, you will see references to Eastside Cheese and a case involving Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries and Food. And that is the leading case on proportionality. And what it says is that an authority should take the minimum action or the least appropriate action and not the most onerous action in terms of deciding which action to take. And of course, the most onerous action in this instance is to revoke the license, and that's what's been asked for. So my submission to you is that there is not sufficient evidence before you to revoke the license. What there is sufficient evidence, and that primarily relates to the evidence of the environmental health team in relation to noise. Now, you've heard from the officer who says that the conditions on the license are sufficient to deal with the issues that arise. And it's a question of making sure that those levels are complied with as agreed. And it is possible within those agreements to address the frequency of noise as well as the intensity of noise in that proposal. The root cause in this instance was coronavirus. It was due to the relocation of the stage. That is the long and the short of it. That is something that has been addressed, has been recognised. It was a necessity at the time and will be addressed in future events. The intention would be to revert to a different layout so that sound is projected differently. What we say in relation to this is that the appropriate course is to attach 2 new conditions to the licence, which are the ones that we have proposed. In essence, the whole of this problem could be resolved by a telephone call to the right person at the time that a problem is occurring, effectively to say, look, I'm being bothered by noise, it's too loud, please would you turn it down? If that's passed to the general manager, to the site manager, as it should be, to the hotline, then that will be actioned. That is the long and the short of it. That is what is needed. If it's too loud, please turn it down. There will be compliance on that and action will be taken. But it is a case of making sure that the right person who has the power to deal and the power to enforce does that. I'm conscious that in all of this, and in this incident, during the course of this year, there was no contact directly with the site manager, despite the fact that contact details were available. Had there been, it would have been actioned. What we will do for the future is to make sure that complaints that are received on the hotline are dealt with and that they are properly actioned. In terms of the level of nuisance, of course, you will be aware that your officers do have the power to serve noise abatement notices, and indeed they have the duty to serve noise abatement notices where a public nuisance is observed. That's not what's happened here. There has been no nuisance notice served, no notice under the Environmental Protection Act served, and therefore what we say is that these are one-off issues that can quite easily be resolved. In relation to the event and the licence generally, it is of very important note that none of the responsible authorities other than the Environmental Health Authority have made any representation. We do not have any representation from the police. I have no doubt, having dealt with the police licensing team and the police officers that police this area over many years, had there been issues of crime and disorder, they would have made a representation and they would be here today. They haven't attended. There has been nothing from the Child Protection Authority. There has been nothing from any of the other responsible authorities. And that speaks volumes about the way that this event has been organised and managed in the past. What also speaks volumes is that this year it went through the Safety Advisory Group process. That is the meeting of all these responsible authorities that are called together to assess the plans. Now, what happened? Those plans were essentially agreed, but there was that one change very late in the day because of the coronavirus situation, and those were the advice that was given was heeded. And that's where we end up with the problem. So the long and the short of it is the response to this is if it's too noisy, we'll turn it down. We do monitor the site. You've seen the monitoring results that have taken place, and those will continue for the future. If necessary, those will be enhanced. But that is a matter, I would suggest, between the organisers and the Environmental Health Service so that appropriate monitoring points are chosen and appropriate levels are agreed. But the long and the short of it, sir, is the conditions that we propose to you, that people are notified when events take place and have the opportunity to report problems if they should occur. So I'm grateful.
Thank you. In conclusion, can I thank everyone for their contributions and remind them that members will now meet to consider the oral and written representations set out in the agenda. A written decision notice will be issued to all interested parties, setting out the verdict as soon as possible, but in any event within the next 5 working days of the hearing. Thank you very much indeed for your attendance and thank you for your contributions and time today. Thank you.